Even though Brazil has over 200 million people, only a tiny percentage of that population is actually fluent in English. Why is that? I am a Brazilian English teacher who had to bypass traditional education in order to become fluent in this language. I have been teaching English now for almost 20 years, and I have worked closely with many different types of students by now. I hold a Cambridge C2 level certificate, and I have helped hundreds, if not thousands of people improve their English for work and study purposes, immigration, and proficiency examinations. I have been teaching English on YouTube for almost 10 years, and combining all the projects and channels I have been involved with here on YouTube, I must have published by now hundreds of thousands of hours of free content teaching English to as many people as possible. With all my experience, both as a learner and a teacher, I believe I have 1 or 2 cents to share about this issue. Now, keep in mind that I'm not going to discuss this subject today from the perspective of I own the truth. I'm just going to share my experience and perspective, considering the fact that I have been on this journey as a learner and as a teacher for over 25 years. So it's almost like I feel an obligation to share my thoughts on why this thing happens here in Brazil. Why, with so many English schools, so much free content online, most Brazilians still don't know English enough or don't speak enough English. But even to those of you who are not Brazilians, stick around. As I share some points here today, I would like you to compare what I say with how things work over there in our country. Who knows? Our countries might have some things in common. So, this is my take on why most Brazilians don't speak English fluently. Hey there, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. How have you been? Hope you've been doing well. In case you're new here, this podcast is designed to help intermediate and advanced learners of English communicate with more confidence, more accuracy, more clarity, and more awareness. If this sounds like something you want for yourself and your English, subscribe to the channel if you are on YouTube, or follow the show if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That way, you won't miss a single new episode. I always talk about helping people speak English with more awareness, right? It's actually part of my slogan. So the purpose of this episode today is actually to raise awareness of this issue. It's a fundamental issue that I see happening in Brazil. Most Brazilians not being able to speak English fluently. I want to cover this issue from 3 different perspectives. The first one is basic education. The second one is societal behaviors and cultural implications. And finally, I want to talk about the individual attitudes and how they can serve as obstacles for English fluency. So let's start here with the first area, basic education, systemic barriers. English is mandatory here in Brazil, in Brazilian schools, I mean. It's part of the national curriculum in basic education, but it is poorly taught. Even after years of English in school, many Brazilians can barely hold a basic conversation. Many can read some phrases but cannot understand spoken English or respond verbally in common situations. Now, there are some reasons for this. One of them is that there are many underfunded and under-resourced schools in the country, unfortunately, especially when talking about the public education system. Many students learn from outdated textbooks, if any, and don't have access to audio equipment or proper internet connection to practice listening or speaking. So, students are generally unexposed to English speaking and listening in the classroom. I was actually talking to one of my teenage students this past week. He was telling me that there are no books at the school. At the school he goes to, there are no books. The teachers have no materials to work with the students. Can you imagine that? Speaking of teachers, we also have the problem of unqualified and underpaid English teachers in the country. Some English teachers don't speak fluent English themselves. Their lessons focus heavily on grammar drills and rote memorization, meaning that students may pass written tests but freeze up if spoken to in English. To teach English here in Brazil, you don't need to be fluent. You need a degree. Let me say that again. To teach English here in Brazil, you don't need to be necessarily fluent in the language. You need to have a degree, a college degree. I can think about my Portuguese teacher back when I was going to school because, I always attended public schools in my life. So I remember that many times our Portuguese teachers were actually our English teachers because, they had the degree to do so, but they didn't have English fluency at all. Classes happened in Portuguese. They were heavily focused on grammar, verb to be more specific, and there was some reading to do, and the test was usually a multiple choice question type of test. You see, that's not really testing your ability to listen and understand English, let alone speak it. So unfortunately, especially in public education, speaking and listening is sidelined. With no emphasis on real communication, a student can study English for years without ever practicing pronunciation or natural conversation. I would say that that's the reality of most students here in Brazil, especially those who attend public schools. They spend 11, 12, 13 years in school? They have English classes all this time because it's part of the national curriculum, but when they graduate high school, they can't speak English. In order to counter that problem, we also have many private schools and private language schools in the country, but they're only a partial solution. Why do I say this? Because most private schools and language schools don't take their students to true fluency or to a true advanced level of proficiency in English. Students reach a B2 level at best after they have finished the entire course, which, don't get me wrong, a B2 level is already good enough for routine situations, but not necessarily for working in an international environment or studying abroad properly. So even the private language schools in Brazil, what they call advanced English or the advanced course is actually a B2 level course. When the student graduates from that institution, that student is a B2 student at best, which is not advanced, it's an upper intermediate level student. I've already taught many English teachers who are at a B2 level or a low C1 level, and they need to get a C1 or C2 level certificate to, be taken more seriously at the schools they work at. It's quite common. So this is the first main problem I see when it comes to most Brazilians not knowing English or not speaking English fluently. The basic education system. In public schools, proper English teaching and practice is almost inexistent. In private schools, they solve the problem partially, but they still have a lot of deficiencies, like I just pointed out. But this is obvious. I'm sure that many people, even in other countries, would agree that basic education, public education, should be revolutionized, should be transformed into something else. So that's obvious. But now I want to steer the conversation towards things that are not that obvious, that I have observed in my life as an English learner and teacher. So first, let's talk a little bit about societal behaviors and cultural implications when it comes to learning English in Brazil. In my experience, most Brazilian learners are motivated by work, not by passion or curiosity to study English. People study just enough English to pass job interviews or add a line to their CV, but they lack motivation for deeper learning or enjoyment, resulting in limited progress. As a matter of fact, I published an episode here on the podcast a few months ago where I actually talk extensively about this. The title is Why You Shouldn't Learn English Just for Work. Because personally, I believe that is a terrible motivator. You should be wanting to learn the language for yourself, for your personal development. You are curious about it. You are into the culture that surrounds the language, the pop culture that comes with it, the songs, the movies, the media, all right? Not for work only. Not because your boss is breathing down your neck for you to improve your English. Not because you want that promotion. Yes, that is a valid reason, but it shouldn't be the only reason why you are studying English. But unfortunately, as I see, most Brazilians, especially Brazilian adults, are motivated by work, not by passion or curiosity to learn English. Something else I observe in Brazilians as a society. Now, keep in mind that I am talking here in general terms, okay? Obviously, I know that there are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, this is what I observe. Something else I observe is there is no urgent need for English in Brazil. Since Brazil has a rich domestic culture, music, movies, TV, most people don't need foreign media. Someone may go their whole life never hearing English spoken naturally, so language skills don't stick. Brazil is a huge country, like I said at the beginning of the video, with over 200 million people. And it's a country very rich in media, in culture. There's a lot of Brazilian music to be consumed here, that is produced here. There's a lot of Brazilian movies, Brazilian TV, Brazilian soap operas. There is a ton of Brazilian media, Portuguese media already. Because of that, the average Brazilian doesn't view the necessity, the need in their day-to-day life to know English, because there is this plethora of Brazilian media. Now, on one hand, I think that that's a positive thing. It means that Brazil is a rich country, culturally speaking. But on the other hand, especially when talking about the ability of Brazilians to learn English well, that's a problem, in my view. It's a drawback, because if you don't have the need, you're not going to think about consuming something in English, listening to something in English. It's different from other countries in the world that are maybe way smaller and that don't have a lot of options in terms of media, movies, TV series. So it's natural that people there, they almost feel the need, they naturally feel the need to consume media in English because there are more options there. Still talking about cultural attitudes. To me, it seems like in Brazil, humility and financial struggle are seen as values to uphold. And because of that, I sense a lot of skepticism among Brazilians toward success, being successful, having money, successful people. Even the mere idea of striving for success seems like a sin. So because of that, culturally speaking, people who are ambitious or financially successful are usually frowned upon. By the way, if you don't know what frowned upon means, look it up later. I'm not going to define it now, but look it up. But for example, I guarantee that if you go to a public school here in Brazil and you talk to the English teacher there and you use the word frown upon, the expression frown upon, they're not going to know what that means. Just for you to have an idea of the quality of education here in the country. Successful business owners and entrepreneurs are seen as either corrupt, immoral, or oppressive, not as positive contributors to the economy. You know, the people who actually generate jobs to society. Guys, it's not the government that gives people jobs. It's the entrepreneurs, the business owners who generate the jobs. But here in Brazil, it seems like being successful, having money, is something that everybody wants, but is more like a wishful thinking kind of thing. Because deep down, culturally speaking, being successful is viewed as a bad thing, as something negative. Now, why am I talking about this? Because that bleeds into something like speaking English, for example, or studying English. Speaking English is sometimes viewed as trying to be better than others, making people ashamed or mocked for making an effort, especially in some social groups or regions. So it's like, oh, look at that. Look at you. Look at her, you know, speaking English, using English words. She thinks she's better than us. It's that mentality, you know? If you know English, or if you're studying English, or if you use an English word, somehow you are snobbish. Another problem I see when it comes to Brazil as a society is functional illiteracy and low reading habits. So let's talk a little bit about functional illiteracy. What is a functional illiterate, or what is functional illiteracy? Let me read the definition for you. Functional illiteracy refers to a person who may have basic reading and writing skills. They can recognize letters and perhaps simple words, but lacks the literacy skills necessary to manage daily living and employment tasks that require reading skills beyond a basic level. They struggle with understanding written directions, filling out forms, interpreting contracts, reading news articles effectively, or using math skills for practical purposes. In other words, many Brazilians already struggle with their own language, Portuguese. This might come as a shock to you if you are from a different country, but the truth is, guys, that even people in Brazil who have academic degrees, who are quote-unquote graduated, many of them can barely write a coherent, clear, and concise piece of text, an email, a report, or they read an article and they fail to understand the main idea, the core idea of that article, the main point of a paragraph. I am not kidding. I wish I were, but I'm not. So even people who have academic degrees in Brazil, not all of them, of course, but there are many people who have academic degrees in Brazil who can barely speak properly and write properly their own language, Portuguese. So, if understanding a Portuguese contract or news article is already challenging for some Brazilians, can you imagine what learning English is like for those people? It's completely intimidating. And that goes back to the way education works in the country. Now, talking a little bit about the low reading habits, because, I believe that's also a factor. I was looking into some statistics and I found this. Look, 53% of Brazilians do not read books at all. 53%. So in a country with a little over 200 million people, we are talking about more than 100 million people in the country who don't read at all, don't have the habit of reading books. Can you imagine this? Now, the average number of books read by the other half of the population, check it out, 2.43 books a year. So, we have 200 million people, 100 million don't read at all, and out of the other 100 million who claim to read something, the average book read, at least in the last year, was 2.43 books a year, not even 3 books. This low exposure to reading seriously limits vocabulary and makes learning another language harder. Like I was just saying, if the person already struggles to understand a piece of text in their own language or to produce a coherent piece of text in their own language, what kind of English learner do you think that person will be? How well do you think that person will acquire a second, third, or fourth language? Another problem I see in Brazil as a society is the lack of familiarity with common cultural references. And by that, I mean English-speaking pop culture like movies, songs, bands, artists, writers. Here's a little test. Walk up to the average Brazilian on the street and ask something like, hey, have you already seen the Godfather trilogy in its entirety? Chances are they haven't. And then walk up to another average Brazilian on the street and ask, hey, could you name the 4 members of the Beatles? Who were the 4 members of the Beatles? Probably not. Then walk up to another Brazilian on the street and ask if they know who composed the song Stairway to Heaven. Many will look at you and go like, what? And don't even get me started with the books. If you walk up to the average Brazilian on the street and you start talking about Edgar Allan Poe, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, Bram Stoker, Oscar Wilde, H.P. Lovecraft, or even Stephen King, who is a more contemporary modern author, they're going to look at you like you're speaking Greek to them. So students who are unfamiliar with English-speaking pop culture find it difficult to engage with films, shows, books, or even idiomatic language. So they miss out on effective immersive learning experiences. So that's definitely another problem that I see in Brazil as a society, culturally speaking. But now let's talk a little bit about the individual. Some individual attitudes that I notice in Brazilian students, in Brazilian learners, and how these attitudes end up becoming obstacles in their language learning acquisition. The first point here is passive learning and lack of accountability. Many learners in Brazil expect to learn by osmosis, only during class time, without practicing outside or seeking resources independently. It's almost like they wish or they hope that the teacher or the school or the course will magically pour the entire English language into their brains. And magically, in just a few months, they will be able to speak English fluently and confidently at a high level. Even the few Brazilians who are fortunate enough to take a formal course or private classes rarely push beyond what's strictly required by the teacher. So what I sense in Brazilian learners is a general lack of accountability. Now, I love this word in English. I love the word accountability because it's a word that doesn't have a direct translation to Brazilian Portuguese. We have the word responsibility in Portuguese, which is closest, but it's not really the same. Accountability is not responsibility. It's not the same thing. If you are accountable, yes, you have responsibility, but responsibility to yourself. It's about ownership. It's about knowing, being aware that you are responsible for your results. You are responsible for taking the bull by the horns and making it happen yourself. Yes, you can ask for help. You need help. You can ask for support. But ultimately, you are responsible for your learning. This is accountability. It goes beyond responsibility. So what I see among Brazilian learners in general is a lack of accountability. They depend too much on a course, on a book, on a YouTube channel, on a teacher. They don't take control of their learning as they should. You know, guys, one of the great things about being a teacher on YouTube is that now, because of my exposure, I got to work with students from other countries. So I got to see how learners from other nationalities behave versus how Brazilian learners behave, and I compare both. Let me just give you a couple of examples here. Recently, I've had a new student joining my conversation club from Japan. It's a Japanese student. And, you know, we have been having the conversation club now for 2 months, since the beginning of March. So we've already had around 9 or 10 sessions of 1 hour and a half each. And every session is recorded. This new student from Japan joined the conversation club, and then on her first session with us, live on Zoom, she already knew a lot about the members of the group. Why? Because she had watched all the past recordings before. Like, you know, it was like 9 or 10 recordings of 1 hour and a half each. So I was like, man, I was thinking to myself, a Brazilian learner would never do that, would never go through that trouble of, you know, watching over 10 hours of video to, you know, become familiar with what's already been discussed and covered and to know who the people are in the group. It was almost like, you know, she joined the conversation club 2 months ago. It was incredible. Another example is another student that I have from Japan in my private community. And, you know, in the community, we usually host monthly live meetups among the members, you know, for conversation practice. And for this student in particular, because he's in Japan, the time of the meetups is a little bit inconvenient because for him it's 4 a.m. But he attends most, if not all, of the live meetups at 4 a.m. And then I was thinking, man, a typical Brazilian learner would never do that, you know, like waking up and attending an English session at 4 a.m. The average Brazilian would never do that. Another student of mine from my private community, she's from Poland. She always attends every session, every conversation club session, every meetup session we have in the community. She's a regular. She hardly ever misses a session. So you see, it's that level of commitment, of accountability that personally I sometimes miss in Brazilian learners. I don't feel like Brazilian learners have that high level of accountability and commitment to their English studies. My ideal scenario of a great class, of a great student, is when the student has already done a lot of work by him or herself before the class. The student has already watched something interesting, taken notes, and checking vocabulary by themselves. And then we have the class, and the student already brings a lot of cool stuff that they've been learning, questions they might have. So it's almost like the class serves as a checkpoint, But that doesn't happen frequently, especially among Brazilian learners. It's almost like, the Brazilian learner goes to the class to learn something there from the teacher, and then the person leaves the class, back to life as usual. Another problem I see that is more individual among Brazilian learners is the fear of mistakes and perfectionism. Students are terrified of sounding stupid or making errors, so they avoid speaking altogether, ironically, preventing the very practice needed to improve. So I see that a lot among Brazilian learners as well, like the pressure to speak English perfectly or to sound like a native speaker. But you don't have to do that. That's not the point of clear communication. I've already met many Americans, Brits, who come to Brazil to live here, and they start learning Portuguese, and they usually pick up the language relatively fast because I don't see them super worried about making mistakes or freezing up because they don't know a word. So I would say even that most of them don't care at all about sounding perfect in Portuguese, but they're able to communicate, and because of that, they pick up the language really fast. Now, I'm not saying that it is the most beautiful sound in the world, listening to an American speaking Portuguese. They tend to mix up the masculine and feminine articles. They go with that strong R sound, everywhere. So, it's not the most beautiful sound, but, it is intelligible and they can communicate. Now, you see, if only Brazilian learners had more of that attitude of just not caring so much about sounding perfect or making mistakes. Don't let that fear hold you, I'm not saying that you have to speak in a sloppy way, but, you can allow yourself to relax a little bit and just, focus on the communication of your message, not necessarily on how perfect or accurate it sounds, at least not yet. Eventually, yes, you want to worry more about your level of accuracy and precision, especially if you aspire to become more advanced as a language user, but for everyday communication, just go for it. Another problem I see among Brazilian learners and individuals is the low investment mindset. People hesitate to spend money on quality English education, preferring instead free apps or free YouTube videos over well-structured classes and courses. Yet, they are willing to finance expensive electronics in installments. This goes beyond me, because, an average Brazilian is perfectly fine with buying an iPhone and paying it for 1 or 2 years, installments, but is really reluctant to pay for private classes with an English teacher, to buy a premium subscription of an app, or enroll at a course. It's too expensive, they say. So that's another problem that I see, the way that Brazilians usually think about English learning. They either expect you to teach them English for free or at an incredibly low price, for peanuts. And the sad thing is that many English teachers in Brazil fall for it. It's almost like they prostitute themselves and their services just to make some bucks. Not me. Another problem I see among some individual learners is that they take the advantage they have for granted. For example, even those who can afford quality schools often don't make the most of the opportunity. And I experience that on a daily basis because I also work at one of the most prestigious language institutions in the country. It's one of the most traditional institutions and it's well regarded. So because of that, many of my students are actually in the top 5% of the population in terms of affluence. They come from wealthy families, from financially stable families, But I see that they don't really care that much about the course, about being there. Most of them don't even know why they're there. They're just there because, their parents are paying for the course, so they have to be there. So I think it's really sad because when I was their age, they're all teenagers, right? When I was their age, I would have loved to go to such an institution to study English there, but I never could. And I also feel some cultural resistance among some Brazilians, not all of them, but among some, like maybe a small group. I sense some cultural resistance, especially coming from intellectuals, some teachers, some academic professors. Some of them just hate Anglo-Saxon cultures. They view English as colonial and reject Anglo-Saxon culture altogether. But when you have professionals like that in education, they're just discouraging language learning. Finally, it's funny because some people view Brazilians as lazy, but I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't call Brazilians lazy per se, because, at least in my experience, from what I see and observe on a daily basis, I think that the average Brazilian works a lot, works really hard. Is the person who wakes up super early to take a crowded bus for 1-2 hours, go to a job they usually hate, to work with a boss they usually hate. They stay there for 8, 9, 10 hours, working that bad job, and then they come back home again, another 1-2 hour commuting in a crowded bus. And they do that every single day, Monday to Friday. So I don't think that Brazilians are lazy per se. But, when I think of Brazilians in general, and I'm speaking as a Brazilian myself, I think the word that comes to my mind is complacency. Complacency, What is a complacent person? A complacent person is someone who is satisfied with the current situation and does not try to improve or change things, often to their own disadvantage. It's almost like there is that general sense of, things could improve, things could get better, but, as long as I can have my barbecue with my friends and my beer on the weekend, watch my soccer match, watch my favorite team soccer match on Sundays, I'm fine. And that's how we live life. So overall, I feel like Brazilians are complacent. I wish that Brazilians were more ambitious as a nation. I wish that Brazilians learned to work more efficiently because, working a lot of hours doesn't mean working efficiently or being productive. All right? These are two completely different things. And I wish Brazilians had more accountability in their lives and in their English learning. Okay, so I've spoken a lot about the negative things that I observe in Brazil as a nation when it comes to public education and English learning, society and culture, and also some individual behaviors that I noticed in some learners. But what can be done about this? Let me give you some reminders here, Some tips. First of all, remember, take responsibility for your own learning. Don't rely solely on schools or courses. Your progress depends on your daily effort. Also, stop consuming so much Brazilian media. Surround yourself with English as much as possible. Change your phone and social media language settings. Follow English-speaking creators and expose yourself to language daily. I would also say increase your cultural knowledge. Watch classic movies. Read classic authors and books. Expand your cultural knowledge. You'll become a much more interesting person if you do that, trust me. Don't fear mistakes. View mistakes as part of the process. Every error is an opportunity to learn. Celebrate your progress, not perfection. Also, invest in your learning when possible. Don't hesitate to buy a good book, take a quality course, or pay for engaging experiences. They're investments in your future, not costs. Finally, I would say, see English as a bridge, not a barrier. Embrace the idea that speaking English connects you to the world, new opportunities, and new friendships. And I would even say even new ways of thinking. If you learn English incredibly well, you will think differently, I guarantee. But I want to finish this episode on a positive note, because even with all these challenges and downsides that I see, I'm still hopeful when it comes to more and more Brazilians learning to speak English well and fluently in the future. I believe that as time goes by, the next generations of Brazilians will be more fluent in English than previous generations, and that's great. Part of that is because of the internet. The internet has democratized knowledge and access to quality information. So nowadays, with a simple internet connection, you can have access to great teachers, great videos, great lessons, great content that maybe you would never have access to without the internet. So now more and more Brazilians, especially younger generations of Brazilians, are learning English earlier and faster and better, which is great because, if that tendency continues, then the percentage of Brazilians who will know English fluently in the future will only increase. But I believe that that's going to happen gradually and slowly. It's going to be something that will come maybe in generations, not now. Yeah, maybe in the next 2, 3, 4 generations, we might see a significant improvement there. And I'm certainly doing my part here, posting these videos, this content every week in order to help as many people, not just Brazilians, but as many people as possible learn this language well. Before we conclude here, it's time for the Learner's Corner. So I have here an email from Nivaldo Ferreira. I get the feeling he's Brazilian, so let's see what Nivaldo wrote. Hello, Thiago. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for helping me indirectly. Last year, I set a goal to work for an international company. After that, I started studying English on my own using the internet, books, and speaking a few times a month on Cambly. I've been watching all your videos. First of all, congratulations. Your content is amazing and you are a great teacher. Thank you very much. At the moment, I can't afford it, but I plan to buy your course in the future. This year, I've had 2 job interviews. I'm still waiting for an answer from one of them, and it has been a great journey. I study English 3 to 4 hours a day. Speaking is still hard and uncomfortable for me, but I'm improving day by day. I just wanted to say you are part of my journey, and I truly thank you. Nivaldo Ferreira. Hey, Nivaldo, thanks for the email. I really appreciate that, and great job for taking the bull by the horns, taking responsibility for your own learning, and making it happen for yourself. It's great to hear that you've been studying 3 to 4 hours a day, and you've been using my videos here, the internet, books, and other online resources to practice your English, to improve your English. If more Brazilians become like you, I think that we have a bright future, at least when it comes to English fluency and proficiency in the country. If you guys want to do it just like Nivaldo, you can send me an email by writing to me at hello.teacherthiago@gmail.com, or you can also send me an audio message by going to speakpipe.com/English with Thiago. Don't forget to check out my paid resources, my pronunciation course, my private community, and my conversation club. Links are all here in the description or in the show notes. And subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment letting me know your thoughts about this topic. Maybe there is something here that I failed to mention or that you disagree. Leave me a comment down below. Just be nice and respectful about it, of course. And share this video with a friend who is also learning English and who needs to maybe reflect on some of the things I pointed out today. I'm Thiago. I'm signing off. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And I'll be talking to you very soon in the upcoming episode. Bye-bye.